Rev up your engines! Okay, we got a 2008 Jeep. It's the guy's baby. It's got 160,000 miles and it runs perfectly fine. He gave up Boston and Texas and moved to Georgia, smart man, to save on taxes. So he doesn't really have to worry about getting it inspected, but it annoys him that he keeps getting these oxygen sensor codes. So let's see what's popping up. So we got our scan tool hooked up and you can see there's oxygen sensor codes up the wazoo. There's oxygen sensor 1, heater performance. Well, we don't care if the heater doesn't work good. It still works. It just doesn't warm up fast. 3, okay, here's a PO. Cooling fan control circuit open. And oxygen sensor bank 1, sensor 2, the circuit is high. Slow response for the sensor. And oxygen sensor 1, heater performance. Now, here's the thing. The guy learned from his own mistakes. First, he tried cheaper Bosch oxygen sensors, and they didn't work. So he went to the original equipment Jeep stuff, and he put them on, but he's still getting all these stinking codes. So I'm getting out my fancy machine here. Okay, now, this is a little change of pace here. I'm gonna be using this ATS eScan Elite from Bernie and the boys in New Mexico. There's Mad Bunny, and there it is, eScan. We're gonna turn it on. It's a very complex computer program that we can check everything, including the oxygen sensor system. Already it sees there is a control problem. As we can see, bank 2 is going rich and lean. Bank 1 is staying rich the whole time.
Problem. Bank 2 fuel trim. Correction marginal. Fuel control problem. System rich. Bank 1 fuel trim. Correction problem. Bank 2 fuel trim. Correction marginal.
Bank 1 has a control problem. Bank 2 is marginal. It's almost got a control problem. Tendency of running too rich. Check under the hood. Here we got a 3-point-liter V6. It doesn't sound bad, but I can feel a slight miss. Now this thing has 160,000 miles on it, so let's do a little test here.
Charging system voltage high. Bank 1 fuel trim. Correction good. Bank 2 fuel trim. Correction good. Charging system voltage good. Bank 1 fuel trim. Correction good. Bank 2 fuel trim. Correction good.
Now you saw it was working good when we revved it up, but at idle it's showing that bank 1 fuel trim is running too rich and that bank 2 is now marginal. It's better, but it's not perfect. Put it down. Trims were good when I revved it up.
Bank 1 fuel trim. Correction problem. Bank 2 fuel trim. Correction marginal. Bank 1 to bank 2 fuel trim. Correction good.
It's idling. It has the fuel trim problem. When you rev it up, the fuel trim goes away. So it's running rich when it's just idling, but at a higher speed. Now, I've seen this a zillion times. The fuel injectors are not working that well at idle. As you rev it up and the engine's spinning faster, they're spraying better, but when they're only going slow, they're probably dribbling from old age. And this is bank 1 fuel trim. At the really low RPMs, it gets red. Here, it's
bank
orange.
1 fuel trim. Correction problem.
See, it's telling you there's a problem.
Bank 2 fuel trim. Correction marginal.
And this is
Bank
marginal
1
because
to bank 2
that is
fuel trim.
orange. See, orange is right
Correction
before red. So, the fuel trim, it's running too rich at lower RPMs. I gotta say, these guys at eScan, man, they know what they're doing. They've got some really interesting stuff that you can analyze problems extremely quickly with. It's visual, it's auditory, the machine talks to you. You get all kinds of information on a simple little road test. So now he's not losing his mind. He put all new oxygen sensors on and it keeps popping codes. This shows you something that everyone needs to know about these generic codes. Exactly what they are, generic. They give general ideas. In this case, the oxygen sensor codes are tripping, not because they have a problem. The data they're receiving is bad. In this case, at higher speeds, the fuel trims are normal. But at idle, bank 1 is running too rich and bank 2 is marginal. Now, knowing these Jeeps and listening to the little clicking sounds, I can guarantee you that it's a very minor problem that has to do with the fuel injectors just being old and having 160,000 miles on them. At lower speeds, they're not as efficient. They drip a little bit of fuel in, as they're clicking. And of course, especially at idle where this has the problem, bank 1 being too rich and bank 2 being almost too rich, marginal means it's almost too bad. It only affects the idle because if it's not perfect amount of air and fuel at idle, it won't run perfect. You go down the road 3,000 RPMs, it doesn't have to be perfect and it'll run quite well. But that's a problem with it. I doubt if he's going to want to put 6 fuel injectors in it for it running as good as it can. If he lived somewhere other than where he lives in Georgia and he would have to do an emissions test every year, he'd have to fix it or he couldn't get his car legally inspected. But in the case of this, he doesn't really have to. Since the fuel injectors, they're relatively expensive for new ones and they're just little electric solenoids. Sometimes they get carbon built-ups on the end of the pinhole, the little nozzle part. And then, yeah, when they're idling, they'll drip a little bit of fuel and then they'll run rich. It's nothing outrageous. Personally, I wouldn't even worry about it in this thing, but now at least he knows what's going on. He had no problems driving it from Georgia to here in Clarksville, Tennessee. It's just that the light comes on and it's bothering him. Now, this is his baby, and it ran like a top when he came here. I gotta say, it's a nice vehicle, you know. 6-speed standard tranny. Doesn't really burn oil. He doesn't have to add anything in between oil changes. Now, the Jeep itself has retired down in Georgia, as you can see, with the peach on the license plate. But, as you can tell by the Boston Bruins logo, Gold Bruins, it led a rough life in Massachusetts. But, hey, it held up pretty well. The frames on these things are pretty solid. Heavy-duty axles. And since this is a Wrangler, this isn't one of the cheaper ones like the Fiat Renegade. They try to call it a Jeep Renegade. It's a Fiat 500 four-wheel drive piece of junk. These are not bad vehicles if you take care of them. He's taking care of it. It went through the winters of Massachusetts. It's retired in Georgia, and it's still going down the road. All the injectors are a little bit off. Those are things that you're going to live with once you know what the problem is. Now, you wouldn't care today, but the AC still works on this thing. And as you can see up here, he custom painted where the fan belt goes, since they didn't bother putting it on there. He wants to know where to put them if they fall off, so he drew that up there. So let's take it for a spin. So let's try this baby out on the highway. Here we go. Still got a good sound for a high-up Jeep vehicle. Now, speaking of sound, it is a Jeep with a rag chop. They're extremely loud vehicles inside. The original Willys Jeep didn't really even have a top on it. If you don't like noise, don't get a Jeep. But this thing is still in excellent shape. You can see at higher speeds, it runs perfectly fine. It's just that the injectors are dribbling a little at low speed. So here we go, a Wrangler that started its life in Boston, ended up in Georgia, still runs quite well, other than it trips these nutty codes at idle because the fuel injectors, instead of making perfectly conical shaped spray, are probably splattering a little at idle, but it runs good enough. Gets the same gas mileage on a highway it always got. If you wanted it perfect, you could buy 6 fuel injectors and put them on, but it wouldn't run all that much different. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Junior says I got a 2000 Honda Accord, 215,000 miles. The power door locks don't lock or unlock. I try it with my remote or by pressing the button. They don't lock or unlock. I have to lock it or unlock it manually with the keys or with my hands. Is there any way I can fix this? Because when I try to lock it with the remote, the passenger door sounds like it's wants to lock and makes a weird sound. It gets relatively expensive. You start hearing a noise on that side, but it doesn't go. That generally means your actuator inside the door has gone bad. You might price out both side door actuators and see what they cost. Now, it is not cheap. You got to take the door apart. If you want to do it yourself, you can watch my video, how to remove an inner door panel, Scotty, and you can see it's not that hard. You can take it apart yourself and you can replace the actuator yourself, and that normally will fix the problem, but those parts are not cheap. Do you really want to go that far on a car that's 22 years old? If you want to, generally the door actuators themselves just break down. And since you said when you push it, you hear a noise, that means your sending unit is working and the receiving unit is working because it's making a noise. It's sending power to it. So 2 door lock actuators would probably fix it, but they're not cheap. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.